But I think the threat to our press freedom, Andrew, is as much from the stick of censorship, but it's also the carrot of bailout money. Tell me the latest with, I understand there's a new bailout scheme, an additional bailout fund that's being offered to Canadian journalists. What's the details?
Well, I'm still trying to sift through the full scope of this, but it appears like an expansion, not just in terms of the dollar figure attached to bailing out media enterprises, but also the definition of who qualifies for it. And this is very much an example of, I think, moving the goalposts, and perhaps a very politically motivated example, where you've got a number of outlets from the guidelines that were released by the committee last week, outlets that are saying, oh, we don't think we'd qualify under this. So by even talking about expansion, I think there's a bit of damage control there of, okay, anyone we missed in the first round of defining this, we're probably going to get in the second round. So I'm not optimistic that this is much more than just an attempt at mending some of the frustration that media outlets who don't think they're eligible are experiencing, which, unsurprisingly, are all of the independent outlets who I think are a lot more deserving and probably a lot more in need of these funds than the big, centralized corporate media.
You know, I have in front of me an article from Le Devoir, which is, of course, a French language newspaper in Quebec. And it talks about a complaint by my old boss, and I know you were on the Sun News Network for a bit, Quebecor. They looked at the government grants and they said, hey, this benefits our competitor, La Presse. We want more. And so instead of saying, oh, we'll make it more even-handed, they're just adding more millions to the pot. And so it's actually new money, and basically it depends on how connected your lobbyists are. I mean, I like Quebecor, but I don't want my tax dollars going to pay them off because they're in some welfare contest with La Presse. I don't think any media should be paid by Justin Trudeau. And here's another observation, and you were making this to me just before we turned the camera on. The more and more money Canadian media takes from Justin Trudeau, the more it seems they obsess over Donald Trump and his flaws, rather than inspecting our own leader and his flaws. It's almost like for every $100 million the media gets, they'll drop one story about Trudeau and add one story about Trump. What do you think of that?
Well, obviously the motivation is a bit unclear as to whether it's the bailout causing it, but I do think that the whole problem with the bailout is that it forces, I think, any thinking Canadian to question what impact, if any, that's having on coverage, because he who pays the piper calls the tune. And when hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing into media coffers, you have to question everything that media outlet receiving the money does. And one trend that I've seen a fair bit of in the last couple of years, but I'd say even more so now, is the media's incessant obsession on Donald Trump, not just covering what Donald Trump says and does, irrespective of any Canadian context, but even asking Canadian politicians what they think about Donald Trump when we are, I think, 3 months to the day away from an election. And a notable example of this, of course, is Trump taking aim at the so-called squad of congresswomen in the U.S., saying, if you don't like what's happening in America, leave. And irrespective of what one thinks of his tweet or tweets on that, I don't think anyone could argue that Andrew Scheer's position on it is particularly relevant, nor is Justin Trudeau's. But again, the media was putting to both of them, to Andrew Scheer and then separately to Justin Trudeau, this idea of, will you condemn Donald Trump's tweets? And of course, what they say, it doesn't go far enough. So then the media reports on that. And when we're this close to an election and the stories are, in my view, distraction stories, there's a big problem with the caliber of coverage here.
That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant show. Every day, I do a video monologue, and then I interview an interesting guest, and then I end by reading my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at therebel.media/shows.